How was your day?
My day's been good actually. I block off Tuesdays on alternate Tuesdays, just record like a lot of my individual podcasts, the solo ones which I do for
Yeah.
Take a Pause. I actually record those on alternate Tuesdays. So sit down, do about 8 episodes. Had a podcast recording before that because Advertising is Dead is going on a break, and this was the last one before we go for a break. So did that as well. So I've had today's been an audio recording day, if I call it that. Hence the warm tea in front of me right now.
So let's just jump into this. I don't have questions. I have thoughts.
Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, perfect. I have we will probably start off with, I was talking to Scott Young, who's the author of Ultra Learning. Right. He's a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And he spoke about something super interesting on my conversation with him. I was asking him, do people actually lead towards success when they wake up early, when they, probably meditate, right? And as much as I followed you on social media, you are someone who has certain habits that you follow.
Yeah.
Right.
Try to follow.
So my question
follow. Yeah.
So my question to him was, do people actually go towards success and achieve it when they wake up at 6 a.m, 5 a.m, like the likes of Warren Buffett and probably your Steve Jobs and so on and so forth? They had these habits, and he termed or coined this term on the call itself and said these are hygiene habits.
Yeah.
Right. Which means that you might wake up at 5 a.m, but what you actually do after that is what defines success for you. You've had a fitness journey. Let's start off from that. How have those habits sort of made you in the person you are today? And how does that sort of transform your living during the weekdays?
So I wasn't a morning person for the longest time. I think even a large part of my entrepreneurial journey, I was never a morning person. I became a morning person after I became a father. Because at some point I was doing nights and mornings became more valuable. But it's interesting what you just said, right? I look at it maybe in a similar sense, but I term it differently, is that you need to find periods with the least amount of distraction for you to do the most valuable work. And for me, that became early in the morning. So 6 to 7 in the morning became a period when everybody's asleep. It is even now. Now it's about 6 to 6:30 now. Daughter wakes up earlier. And I kind of use that period of time, and I still use that 6 to 6:30 period even now, to kind of ease into the day. What's been interesting for me is that I use the top and the bottom of my day for myself. I call it my me time is the first thing and the last thing I do. Little before, after the first, so basically wake up at 6 a.m. because I have to wake up my daughter by 6:30. She has to be in school by 7:45. So between 6:30 to 7, I get her ready. Close enough to 7, between 5 minutes to 7 to 7:15. My wife makes sure she's grabbing something to eat while I grab a small bite as well. One of us drops her off to school, and then the morning starts. So, and then work out in the morning and work after that. Evenings again, right? She comes back to school in the afternoon, goes out to play in the evening, comes back around 7-ish. So between 7 and about 8:30 is when she's got time to hang with us. Again, when she has my 4.5-year-old has the most packed social schedule of anybody I know. Again, that part is still about 8:30 8:39 when we all wind up and sleep. 8:30 is what we try because kids need more sleep. And my wife generally sleeps off by about 9. Pooja is an early sleeper as well. So between 9 and about 10:30 is again my time. I'll sit and read a book. And I've tweaked a few things. I've tried different things. I don't stick with all of them all the time, but I've realized over time that what makes me feel fresher, what makes me feel like I'm actually feeling more refreshed, feeling like I'm more focused. Simple things like just read a book for half an hour before you go to bed. Journal first thing in the morning. Just get that whatever's in your head at night out of your mind and onto a piece of paper, so it's cleaned out. But also, it doesn't have to be every day. Like some days I'm looking at a phone till I go to sleep. It's a terrible habit to have, but I do it very often. Some days I'll wake up first thing in the morning, pick up my phone, right? I feel we'll all do that. The problem is the internet tells us that this is the only way to do it. I know people are super productive who work way late into the night and only wake up by noon, but they can afford to do that. And their cycle is that. You need to find what your cycle is. My cycle became what it is primarily because of it was connected to a child and her cycle. I know many people who work very well at night because again, you're trying to find periods late at night or early in the morning and someone's not distracting you. There isn't that, that WhatsApp message, that email, or anything else. And the same thing kind of goes for workouts as well. I look at workouts in two ways. One is it's my period of meditation almost because I don't, I seldom take calls when I'm working out. I used to keep my phone on D&D, but now I've let that be because I just let Siri tell me in my ear who the call is from. If I don't know the number, I don't pick it up. I continue my workout. And that 1 hour, 1.5 hours is me fully focused on a certain activity, and it makes you kind of think about a lot of other stuff.
Correct.
But it also does something else for me. My workouts help me have the energy to perform and do all the stuff that I do. I shifted at a certain point of time in my life where a little before we had our daughter, I was like a lot more buff. I had always wanted to be that slightly buffer person from a gym. So, biceps had gotten bigger, chest had gotten puffier. Stamina was at its lowest because I would huff and puff if I had to walk a few flights of stairs because I basically focused on a visual look and not innate fitness. And I used to kind of be tired taking care of a baby, and my wife made me realize that, and I kind of switched from being this person to focus on visual appeal of working out. I think three fundamental things, and I actually learned this from Saurabh, who runs SoFit. He actually puts it really well. He says you got to run better, you got to lift better, you got to jump better. Three primary things in your life which you need to do, for which you need to be physically fit. Think of any activity you might do in life which requires physical. It's just you're running, lifting, you're jumping. Literally three things you want to do. And that's what I focus on now. So I have a lot more energy. My food, my workouts are all tuned to make sure I perform at the level I need to, because I'm little over 4 months from being 40. And I feel I'm fitter than I was at 35 or at 30 right now.
Absolutely.
I've just tried to find things that make me perform better today as I'm getting closer to 40 than I was at 25, 30. Or even 35. I still have a drink. I still like to have a great meal, go out, eat biryani, go have, do that as well. But you also don't want to tell yourself that you don't want to do all those things.
That's true.
You got to balance it out. You should go have ice cream. I love having ice cream. But you kind of balance that out in the rest of the week. You can't always just do that. At least once you cross 30 is how I look at it. But all of these things help me do better as a professional, help me do better as a creator and everything else. Because you have the energy, you have the mental focus, you go in and do that, and you just build a system.
Absolutely. And I think, more than the physical state of being, you've spoken about in the last couple of minutes, about eating, about, working out, about the schedule that you have with your daughter. Does this all also go into how much you work here? Like, what's the workout that you do for your mind? Because I feel when I listen to not just your podcast, you are an author right now, and you had to jump into different shoes. By that I mean different mindsets when you're doing that. How does Varun do that?
It's tougher when you have to move headspaces in one single day. It's easier to do if you batch it up. Like even if I'm doing 2 kinds of podcasts in a day, right? I'm doing a business podcast and suddenly I'm moving to something where I'm talking about personal development and how do you kind of, focus your mind. I've got to take a certain period of time to kind of switch off from it. And that, while the worst thing to do, which I do very often, is to kind of watch something and just tune out. I've realized that like even something like just watching a cricket highlight really like switches your mind off. You go back into it and you're fine.
Correct.
But I just like to I make sure there's a break between it. I take these small like 15-minute between meetings, between recordings, between work. And those really help. I realize they keep me fresh, but I'm constantly prepping. So oftentimes the execution is not the problem, it's the preparation that's the problem. Right? So for instance, I'll give you an example. I do Take a Pause, which is these tiny bite-sized episodes, largely. And I do Take a Pause, which is these bite-sized episodes, like 2 to 3 to 4 minutes. But what I'm constantly doing is, because I consume a lot of content, because I'm constantly reading or just like, listening to a podcast, watching interviews, I'm always taking screenshots, noting down things which I like and putting them onto separate scribble. I call them scribble notes. So literally my Apple Notes has literally like 5 to 6 of those sheets, which are just filled with screenshots, specific instances in a podcast, which you can luckily kind of shift and it will play from that point if you have to revise. I go through highlights from books which I read. And so by the time I've gone into record, I can record 8 episodes in an hour, which is what I just literally did before we got into this recording, right? Sat for an hour, got 8 episodes done. If I had to sit and come up with each of those at that point of time, it will take me a lot more time to do. But
makes sense.
What makes it helpful is I've prepared. Similarly, when I do any of my other podcasts as well, I'm making sure that my producer sends me some notes. I'm also spending 20 minutes at least or 30 minutes at least before every recording, really looking at not what my guest has said as much as what they like to talk about. I try to see what space they operate in, what people are really talking about that space. Correct. So I do a little bit of that. The Take a Pause conversations are a lot more research driven, because there you have to go deeper into human psyche, deeper into motivations and everything else. So there we go a little deeper, and thankfully my producer gives me a lot more, I would say, matter there to kind of deal with. The business ones are easier, because if you're in the business space, you know what to ask. You just have to pick a few pieces and you kind of play with that and you move with it. Even with work, I've realized that just making sure you give yourself time to block yourself off to work. The problem we all have is we fill our days with meetings. We never fill ourselves time to actually sit and do the work. I struggled with that for a long time. Right? Is that you do meeting, and then you finish the day. I'm like, oh my God, I have so much work to finish. I haven't gotten down to anything.
Correct.
So now I have blocks of time through the week, and I obviously privilege is the fact that when you're in leadership, you can do those things. Is I just block time for like focused individual work. That's how I wrote the book as well. I would just block out time to sit and write early in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. And you just do that. And there are some days, especially now with physical and in-person and meetings happening also with digital, I will have days when I'll just do physical meetings. Mostly twice a week, I'm sure I'm out. But I try to make sure that at least 2 days in a week, I'm just at home. So, and I think now the good part is everyone's kind of flexible with that. Everyone's kind of dealing with the same problem.
That's true.
But the biggest problem is all of us spend our day in meetings and we have evenings to kind of do the actual work. And that's when our brain is the most tired, right? Your brain's been through all these meetings all day long, all the discussions. You ending the day like, oh my God, I have so much to finish. So you work late into the night. You don't get enough sleep, and you start off the day next day on a back foot. Whereas I find the afternoons to be the best period. A lot of people say get your most important tasks done first thing in the morning. I actually love the afternoons. Start off individual work right around lunch break for most people. I eat lunch a little later. I eat lunch about 2:33 in the afternoon. So between that 1 and 3 is a good time to get a lot of individual work done, because no one's going to ask you for a meeting mostly during around that time. They're all having lunch, or they'll have like a team meeting or something like that, right? So that's my block. My block is that between my sweet spot is between 1 and 3, where I will do all this. Most calls, meetings, etc. are post 3, or between, let's say, 9, 10 and 12. And that's how I kind of bridge it together. Again, the fact that I can look at my calendar and say yes and no to things a lot more easily than someone who's, let's say, doing a regular day job. is basically the privilege I've earned.
Yeah,
But that's what you should work towards. You can batch your day together, and then eventually you get stuff through. But don't do focused work before you go to sleep is the only thing I'll say, because you sleep wired and you don't sleep well. So I try to like even read something which is totally like mentally switched off. I read philosophy oftentimes before I go to sleep. It's great to listen to kind of read. It's not that it puts me to sleep, but I think it gives me more peaceful sleep.
All right. I think two things that I do very differently, and I think both of us are on the same privilege level, because today I was able to come back home just because I'm in the leadership role, right? I can't do that when I'm having a 9 to 5, for example.
Exactly.
Right? And I think the way I have tried to jump on between tasks is I try to put a little pressure on my brain, because as a young child, it was always the last moment I would study just to sort of scrape through. Right? It didn't get me well in college, but what I usually do is I do something called the daily munchies, which is again a 2 to 3 minutes, a quick thought that comes in my mind, because I scroll through Instagram and I'm like, this is a good quote. What is my thought about it? And I share it. So just 15 minutes before going to work is when I quickly switch on my laptop, open GarageBand, and I record that podcast.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think let's talk about when you were young. Were you doing these things, or was it not at all?
Not at all. So I've innately been someone who comes up with things very quickly. So I'll have an idea very quickly. I'll come with some random thought. And I remember as a kid, I would always remember the weirdest things, never the stuff that mattered. So I would remember what happened in some movie with some character very easily. But you ask me to remember a math equation, then you're gone. Like I was that person.
I think that's like 99%. I'm saying that's like 99% of the crowd that's listening to this.
Yeah, and that's what I realized, that you remember stuff which you actually enjoy. It's tougher to remember stuff you don't enjoy, right? And I was that. So it's never been a problem for me to come up with stuff. It's always been a problem to clearly articulate it and to build a system around it. I think for way too long, I relied on, I can do this, I'll wing it. And I winged my way through my 20s and my, even I think an early part of my 30s still. At some point I sat down and said, my interest in this space actually made me learn it. I used to always think of anything which is, let's say, self-help or philosophy or mumbo jumbo. And why do you need to learn these things? Let's focus on learning the stuff that helps you do the work. But at some point, either it was podcasting, I don't know, or was it the fact that I might have just got the right book at the right moment or something like that. I just started to work on saying, okay, how can I do this while not being so hyper and putting myself in that pressure spot every time. This presentation, literally on the drive to the presentation, I'm making the presentation. You're relying on individual strengths, which you naturally have to kind of get through things. Never truly prepared for anything. So which is why an early part of my 20s was really bad, because failed through my engineering, didn't do well in school, till I reached an MTV where I felt, this is work I can do. Because that required you to come up with stuff on the fly all the time. I was great at reality TV because nothing was, even though you could plan everything, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Right. So you're always thinking on the fly, which is I love being a producer doing that phase, because you didn't have to, you would make plans, but the plans would never stick because things would change. And I think that's what we all fall into. We all fall into the trap that we rely on our strengths a lot more. We don't, kind of not, I don't say weaknesses. I think we rely on our strengths way too much, and that makes us overuse them. Now, you don't have to be strong with everything, but if you overuse your strengths, at some point, something's going to give. And rather than finding a more balanced way to kind of look at how you perform in life, and that only, to be honest, I feel it only happens with age. I've realized this. I don't think I would have even if I had learned some of these things in my, by the time I was 25, 26, I don't think I would have practiced them. Because I would have been, but I'm managing it. What's the problem? So yeah, that's how I kind of evolved it, if I put it that way.
I think age definitely does that to you. And I think the way you explained, all of us use our strengths, and I'm going to tone it down, not for the folks like us, right? We're at the top of the table. We probably make a living by making decisions only, which means we've trained our life in that way. But I think there's a part of Varun which also focuses on the things that are not your strengths, right? Like when you first started podcasting, or when you started The Glitch, or when you started working in MTV. How did you jump on to learning? Like what are these things that you do that keeps you an everlasting learner in the process of growing up and giving back to the community?
So I've looked at every job. I look at my time at MTV, even doing my entire, like till now, my stint at Glitch, right? I've always, in a professional side, I've always looked at the fact that you need to fill gaps. There will always be people who can do many parts of the job.
Correct.
What most of them struggle with is who's going to fill the gap. So at MTV, for instance, when I went into intern, I just spent a lot of time figuring out what every producer needed, which they didn't get. Someone needed someone to go keep scouting for faces to put on a style show. Someone needed someone to do research for a reality show. The other person needed someone who could just write like short VJ scripts, stuff like that. So I would go volunteer to do those. I'll say, I'll figure this one out. Let me just do that for you. And that made me do, it brought a few things to light. One is the fact that I got to learn because I was doing multiple things. What I also got to do was they saw me as someone they could rely on for stuff which they didn't want to do or didn't have the time to do. So made my 4 months of internship in a way, like I literally worked on, I think, almost all the shows MTV had at that point of time. In some capacity or the other, including being randomly at the back of the camera or in front of the camera, all kinds. What also happened when Glitch started off is that Rohit and I have similar mindsets in terms of how we look at creative. I had done a lot more logistics work. So I took on the role of running operations, looking after finance. I'm terrible with numbers. I handled finance for a large part of the early years of Glitch. I looked after production. But even there, eventually you hire people because they can do specific things really well. You groom them, give them the space to do that really well. And you take care of the stuff which they shouldn't take care of. Don't have them take care of, a payment that's gone sideways, or a contract that has to be read, or literally that Lou is not working. So that would be my focus. Let's make sure all that stuff is taken care of. Let them focus on the job. And I feel that's the most, and my biggest learning as an entrepreneur has been that an entrepreneur's job is not to do the work, it's to fill the gaps. That's how I look at it. I still look at it that way, is that fact that assemble the right set of people, unleash them and give them everything they need, and just fill the gaps is all you need to do. Podcasting was interesting for me because it was after a long time a way for me to get into the actual doing. Not the managing, not the execution. So I was actually doing the work from an execution standpoint, not from a managing standpoint.
Correct.
And it made me also rework a bunch of things. Like I never spoke this at this pace in my life. I've always been like a quick talker. Like I normally talk like this. You realize the pace is much faster. But podcasting has made me a slow talker. It's taught me to be more clear about my thoughts, articulate them better. It's helped in the job as well. Suddenly I'm this slightly more articulate person who speaks a little more clearly, because I would always be this person who has ideas going like 5 steps ahead. But because I've gone 5 steps ahead in my head, I'm talking about that step. I'm not talking about how I've gotten there.
Got it.
So there are many times I know that I've had people in the team who've been with me for a long time say that knowing him, he's thought of something. He doesn't have the patience to tell us why he went there, but he's figured something out. So they kind of let that one pass. After 13 years, they're all like, it's okay, he's figured something. So podcasting was great for me to get into that. And that's where I really started to enjoy systems. Till now I was building systems for other people, for them to kind of use, for them to perform better, to solve their problems. here I started building systems for myself. And then the more I explored systems people use, like even writing a book, right? I wrote a book in a slightly non-traditional system. I used a note card system, which Ryan Holiday, the Stoicism writer, uses. So I did the note card system. A loose version of it, I adapted it to my own style of research and writing. But I actually have like an entire book full of those note cards, which is not his style of printed out note cards. I literally took pages, but it broke them into 2 parts and just wrote on that. So I could plan out what was in each chapter, what stories I was putting in, what quotes I was including. Figure the flow of the chapters by just taking that as a system. So I spent a lot more time on that because the writing came in instinctively. I could sit and write 1,000 words in an hour, which is how I normally write. My pace of writing is reasonably quick as long as I have a semblance of the idea I'm going to write about. As you see, there's a trend here. I'll do research. I'll put a lot of stuff everywhere. When I sit down to execute, I have stuff with me. I have the fodder. Now I'm just sitting and writing, or I'm just sitting and recording. So these systems are only, I would say, 3-4 years old. I didn't need them before. Before I was solving problems for a brand, for a client, for a TV channel, for a team member. Here I'm solving problems for myself after a long time. And that made me discover that I enjoyed this a lot. So the book writing process for me was actually one of the most fulfilling processes creatively I've had in my life. It was a good 7-8 months of just sitting and really focusing on one piece, putting it together, changing it around, allowing myself the individual space to work on a project that way. Compared to everything else that I've ever done, which has been a group activity. So I'd say that's how the systems came in from the creator side, which have now also helped me a lot on the professional side, because I get to add a lot more hands-on when I'm needed to. Even before I would, but before I would from an experience standpoint, because I would knew, okay, someone has a problem, this is how someone did it, or how we did it like 3 years ago, or I know there's a person here who can help you. So I would do that. But now I actually, like, after a long time, I would say hands dirty. This is how things are happening right now.
Got it. I think it makes a lot of sense because, once you figure out the structure that works well for you, you just sort of go after it, right? Now, I didn't know a lot about you, but I figured out from one of the talks, I think, one of the TED Talks that you gave at JNTU Kakinada, that you're also a South Indian boy.
Yes. small town South Indian boy.
Yeah. Right now you're in Mumbai, if I'm not wrong.
And Mumbai,
right? How was your early ages when you were growing up? Like not the schooling part of it, because I think for all of us it sucked a big time. Like I eventually had to drop out. But how was it growing up in a South Indian family? And we'll then get back to something that you spoke about, which was the small town mindset, right? I will probably focus on that a little bit. But how was it growing up?
Actually, like, I grew up in a town called Kakinada. It's now a city, coastal Andhra Pradesh, close to a beach. Typical, I would say, Telugu boy of sorts. Like, half my family are doctors, half of them are engineers. I am also an engineer. Technically, I did get my degree, so I can call myself an engineer. And all the doctors stayed in India, all the engineers went to America. But that's where the standardness kind of goes away. My parents had me very young because they got married very young. I think my parents were 20 and 24 when they had me, so they were super young. Dad was still studying, mom was still studying. And because they were young and they were exposed to a bunch of things, I grew up with the Beatles. I grew up with books. I grew up with being able to consume stuff, which I would say many people, even in my class in school, didn't have. Maybe not even access to, because they didn't have the ability to. But I think the parents weren't interested in those. So while I would go watch a Telugu movie, I would also go watch other kinds of cinema. I would read books from across the board. In hindsight, my mother showed me Khalil Gibran's books when I was like very young, and I didn't understand the value of it. Now I do, which is why she gifted me a book recently, saying maybe now you'll see the value in that. Fair enough. So that's what I grew up with, and I also spent a bunch of time in Manipal on the other coast, because my dad was a doctor and he was finishing his master's there. But all in all, I was this. I don't look South Indian.
You don't.
Which I'm told. And it has been a thing in my through my entire life. Like my entire family looks like I do. I don't know. We have many jokes about this thing. Where did this come from? But what happened because of that is that I don't think I stuck out because it's a small town. The community was small. I had a good bunch of friends. My later part of my school journey back home was great because I eventually moved to this slightly smaller school, which is connected to one of the industries there. So they didn't take too many students in, and it was well managed, and it was a lot better than going to some of those larger public schools of sort. But what changed for me was there was a point of time after my 10th when I decided to move out of Kakinada. And, you're in a small town, you tend to perform better because of what you have as competition of sorts or people around you of sorts. But when you suddenly move to a city, you realize that maybe there is so much that people know more than you. And that hits you a lot harder. So I had a great time growing up because, could take a cycle and go to the beach and hang out there with a few friends when you were like, this is pre alcohol days. So could just go hang there with some thumbs up because we weren't old enough to drink. Or you'd find some local chili chicken and have it there, or go watch a movie, Chiranjeevi movie in the theater. So I did all the standard stuff. I mean, I was also someone who liked to play by himself at home. So I would have my toys, I would make believe, I do stories. I would come up with imaginary things in my own head. So that was all just me by myself.
Yeah.
You take me out of that house, you take me to my friends. I'm like straight up gulti, like shirt 2 buttons open, go play cricket, go hang out. So I could switch roles very easily because I think that both are my personality, just that I chose to put one out there, chose to put one at home. And but when I went to Bangalore is when things really kind of changed for me mentally, because I suddenly felt like a fish out of water. I felt like everybody was cooler, everybody knew more.
Yeah.
You suddenly went from being in every sports team to not even being in contention to being in any sports team. You had an accent, which there was this point when I moved to Bangalore, and suddenly you go from a small town to a bigger city, and everybody seems cooler. Everybody has more exposure than you in most cases. You also don't know enough. You listen to the wrong music because you listen to whatever you could find. And everything kind of suddenly went south. And you doubt yourself. I went from this person who was right up in front in everything, trying to be in sport. Not that I was great. I just managed to figure things out in sport half the time. Performing for everyone. So suddenly saying, okay, I'm very happy to be in the background. I don't want to be up in front because the chances of you being made fun of, you being kind of like shoved around a little bit is a little higher. So I became that person. I was that for a long time. I think a large part of my Bangalore journey was me being supremely insecure about my own abilities, what I could do. It didn't help that I wasn't doing well in school. Got kicked out of boarding school in between for bunking out. Didn't do well in engineering. So it was a bit of I'd say my entire period in Bangalore, although I had a lot of fun, made a lot of friends, discovered a whole new world. I spent a large part of it also the back of my head really being insecure, being low on confidence, and all that stuff. So
got it.
That's where I think the shift in childhood, you go from being this really fun, outgoing kid who likes to tell stories. Somebody would come to my house as a kid. I would come with costume changes to perform. Now play a song and I would dance for you. I was that kid. I went from that kid to being someone who's like, okay, I'd rather just be in the background. It's okay to kind of be slightly invisible. And it took me years. I think eventually coming to Bombay, going to Pune, then eventually Bombay, making the right friends again, finding the right career for myself really made me kind of come out of it. But I think late teens and early 20s were a period of almost like switching myself to the background.
Got it. And the reason I asked you, I wanted to ask that, Varun, is not because I wanted to know about you, but more in terms of now that you are a dad, a parent. I've been a firm believer. I had a lovely childhood, good school. did well, good college. I've been very privileged to have good parents, and I always have, read about how parenting sort of changes the rest of the life for a child, right? I'm not a parent yet. Hopefully soon, in probably half a decade from now. How did that part of Varun, come out? Because I remember you were on a trip recently. When I had mailed you, right?
Yeah, I was in Paris. Yes,
you were in Paris, right? And what is it about parenting that you would probably want to share that you've either learned or has been driven down from your parents?
I think I understand my parents a lot more now after I became a parent. I get why a lot of stuff happens the way it does. I don't think you'll ever realize it till you actually become one yourself. I have these long chats with my mother about this. I'm like, I get you. Okay. I know why. And she has this smirk saying, I told you, but you had to experience it to figure this one out.
Correct.
But I think what I took from my parents was my parents let me figure myself out a lot more than a lot of parents do. They never pushed me to do a specific thing. They would only say when I was really failing badly, when I seemed clueless, they would give me options. They would push me towards an option which they thought would be the easiest one for me to do if they felt like I didn't have any clue.
Yeah.
But they never forced me to stick to a path. Like, very easy for a doctor's son or daughter to become a doctor. My dad never forced me to be a doctor. He said, He said, at some point, you got to decide if you're going to do this truly from the heart, or just don't do it. I said, I don't want to do it. He said, don't do it. Okay. So I took that, and that's one thing I've taken from them, and it kind of seeps down to how I parent my daughter Leah as well. But I feel also in a different time where now I feel kids have a lot more, schools are different. How they're taught are different. Their world is different. Right. And what I've realized over the last 4.5 years is that parenting is a lot more about what you're trying to figure out. You're setting that guardrails for your kid so they can play within without telling them how to play within it.
Okay.
It's like you can choose you can set the playground. How they play inside it is going to be on them, right? And the more you try to control how they play, what they do, they will go in the opposite direction.
Correct.
And weirdly enough, looking at my daughter, I understand myself a lot better because she has many of the traits which I have. She craves autonomy like I do. If you tell me go from A to B, I'll go. Tell me how to go from A to B, I will revolt. She does the exact same thing. So it helps me understand myself. It helps me also get through to her a lot better. My wife, unfortunately, Pooja, stuck with two versions of some of those traits, as I am stuck with two versions of some of her traits. But more than anything else, being a parent kind of makes you look at life a little differently. Because I think that starts with marriage, eventually comes on when you have a kid, is that you start to look at things as a whole of many parts and not just you.
Yeah.
Because at some point, social connection is what gives us the most amount of gratification.
Correct.
As much as we might succeed in life, right? All these things about saying, I know, like, people won't have like big houses and cars and millionaires. And I'm like, who are you sharing that with is far more important. And you realize that honestly, if you find the right partner and if you have a kid, because you want to share those with them, you want to be there for them. And that's made me look at friendships differently, for instance, made me look at my own childhood differently when I look at just how my parents were and how they tried to make sure that I didn't have to kind of not have them around. How they balance that part out.
Makes sense.
And I think more than anything else, being a parent teaches you that it's like you don't have control, but you need to have some form of control. It makes you a lot calmer. It makes you look at all decisions you make in a slightly less stressful light. If you look at it that way, I know people who hyperventilate all the time who are parents.
Correct.
But I'm like, I'm sent her off to school. I have no control about what happens between 7:45 a.m. to 12 p.m. That's on her. I can just tell her how to deal with certain situations. If she tells me about them, she doesn't tell me about them, that's her thing to do. So it cannot become about you. It's about your child. And that makes you less, how do you put it? the tendency for you to be arrogant enough to believe that everything is about you goes away if you look at parenting this way. Because everything's not about you, right? Everyone's figuring their own thing out.
Correct.
So, I mean, weirdly contrived response to your question, but that's how I look at how parenting.
No, I think very, very interesting, Varun. You've covered two things that I believe in a lot. One is, regardless of having a child or not, you set the playground, and whatever happens, whether you're mentoring someone or coaching someone, you just have to set that context for them, and what they do with that is completely up to them, right? And I think it resonates a lot with your newsletter as well. One thing that's common is that Unschooled, and my company's name is also Unschooled, and the idea came from that, right? Me and my co-founder were looking at how do we make sure people learn something and by themselves, right? We just sort of set the context, and that's very interesting. I think I've not touched the parenting part with any of my guests. And the one reason I wanted to is because through the last 40 minutes, I realized you are taking these different roles, and I can't even fathom to sort of think about these roles, but you're doing it like in real time. And I think parenting is a very essential part because you're also learning in that process, right? Perfect. To wrap it up very quickly, what I want to close on is, I know there are certain things you do that wakes you up, but why did you pick up doing these two things? One is writing a book and then podcasting, right? What is the ultimate goal here? And who's the audience that you want to sort of have listen to you?
So both writing and podcasting take care of one innate need I've always had in my life, which is to share stuff that I'm consuming. I am a sharer. I am that irritating person in the room who will say, have you watched this video? Have you read this book? Did you know this? About stuff that is not in any way your, like, he doesn't know what's in the textbook, but he knows this random fact. I was that kid, right? So both of them and both the formats and all the formats which I use are innately about, can you condense together different pieces of information and share it with a wider audience? That's where, I mean, my creator satisfaction comes from that, the fact that I've been able to do that. From a vision standpoint, for me, I feel there is a lack. There is too much information on the internet. There's very little curation of it. Or rather, not very little. There is far lesser curation than there needs to be. And I've always believed that if you can actually funnel down value for people to consume content which will actually help them in their life, then you could actually you'd be on to building something really interesting. So I've always had this vision of a media company that just literally gives you the right kind of content to consume. You don't have to come up with it. It's all there. It's curated. So in my head, somewhere I'm building a media network behind my thought process. But I think I do a lot of this just for the sheer satisfaction of sharing stuff. Even my book, right? If you look at the bibliography of my book, you'll find about 20 to 25 books, which you can actually buy because I got value from them, which I took pieces from them. And my literal process was, let's map out all the stories from my life, which I would want to kind of have in the book. All the concepts, philosophies, and theories, which I've always found to give me perspective. And from books, which I think will have value. And how do we align them into individual chapters and lessons? Is at a broad level what I did. Obviously took a lot of mix and match and cut, copy, paste, and some stuff got thrown out the window in between. But I largely like to just share information which has given me value, so it will give somebody else value. Each piece of content I create at the core is that. It's literally saying, can you learn something interesting from this to give you value in life? Over time, you'll figure ways to monetize, do that stuff. And thankfully, I have a day job, have also had a good entrepreneurial journey to be able to kind of also not have this be a primary way to monetize. But monetization is always at the back of your head. I think it's an innate human problem that you will always think of, how do I make money out of this, which will not go away. But so that's really the plan. The plan is that I want to write a bunch more books. I have ideas for at least 2 to 3 more books, which I will hopefully write, but I need to process of putting this book out there is still on. It will be on for a large part of the year. And then maybe later in the year, start working on the next book.